My parents humiliated me in front of an entire ballroom and smiled while doing it. I didn't say a word. Neither did my husband. But the room was about to change. They always said a retirement dinner was supposed to be a celebration, a moment of pride, a night where family comes together and honors a lifetime of work. For me, it became the night I understood exactly where I stood in my parents' world. The ballroom was warm and golden, filled with my father's colleagues, old friends, and people who had known him as a respected man for decades. White tablecloths, soft music, polite laughter. My mother moved through the room like a queen, greeting guests, accepting compliments, soaking in the attention. My sister stood beside her, elegant and confident, already acting like the family's future. And then there was me. I sat at the far end of the table with my husband, hands folded in my lap, smile carefully practiced. No one asked how I was doing. No one introduced me with pride. I was just there. When it came time for speeches, my mother stood first. She laughed lightly and talked about sacrifice, about how hard it had been to support my father's career, about the successful children who made it all worth it. She looked at my sister and praised her achievements, her lifestyle, her smart choices. Then her eyes flicked toward me. And of course, she said, her smile tightening, not everyone in the family took full advantage of the opportunities they were given. A few chuckles rippled through the room. I felt my face burn. My father followed. His voice was calm, authoritative, the same tone he'd used my whole life when delivering disappointment. He talked about discipline, ambition, and how some people expect life to be easy just because they marry well. Then he looked directly at my husband. Not all success is real, he said. Some people hide behind appearances. The room laughed again, louder this time. My husband didn't react. He didn't tighten his jaw or look away. He simply reached for my hand and held it gently, grounding me as humiliation washed over my skin. This wasn't new. I had been the family's quiet failure for years. The daughter who married too early. The one who didn't chase titles my parents could brag about. They never asked what my husband did beyond vague assumptions. They never cared enough to find out. After dinner, the microphone was passed around for congratulations. My sister said something polished and emotional. Old co-workers praised my father. Then, unexpectedly, the host turned to my husband. "And you are?" he asked kindly. "Would you like to say a few words?" My mother stiffened. My father frowned. My husband stood. He adjusted his cufflinks calmly and smiled at the room. "I hadn't planned to speak," he said, voice steady, clear. "But since tonight is about honesty and legacy, I think it's appropriate." The room quieted. "My wife has been described tonight as someone who didn't live up to expectations," he continued. "Someone who made poor choices. Someone unworthy of pride." My mother shifted uncomfortably. "I want to be very clear," he said. "Any success I have, any peace I know, exists because of her." He paused, then added, "For those who don't know me, my name is Daniel." A few people nodded politely. "I'm the founder and majority shareholder of Hartwell Systems." Silence. Someone dropped a fork. Hartwell Systems wasn't a small name. It was a global company, the kind people read about in business sections, the kind my father had once mentioned admiring. "I stepped down from public-facing leadership years ago," my husband continued, "because privacy mattered to us. My wife mattered more than titles." Faces changed around the room. Confusion, shock, recognition. My father's face drained of color. "My wife never asked for money, status, or validation," Daniel said. "She asked for respect, and tonight, she was denied that." He turned toward my parents. "You humiliated her publicly," he said calmly. "And in doing so, you revealed far more about yourselves than you ever did about her." No one laughed this time. My mother tried to smile, tried to recover. We didn't realize. That's the point, Daniel interrupted gently. You never bothered to realize. He took my hand again. We're leaving now, he said. But I hope this night stays with you, because success without kindness isn't success at all. We walked out together. No applause, no protests, just stunned silence behind us. Outside, the air felt cooler, cleaner. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding my breath for years. In the weeks that followed, the tone changed. Calls came in. Apologies wrapped in excuses. Invitations that suddenly included my name. I declined them all. Because that night wasn't about revenge shouted from a stage or wealth thrown in their faces. It was about truth standing quietly in a room full of arrogance. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt free. For a while after that night, everything was quiet, too quiet. No angry messages. No dramatic confrontations. Just a sudden, uncomfortable distance. Like my parents were trying to decide which version of me they were allowed to acknowledge now. The version they'd dismissed for years, or the one they could suddenly brag about. Daniel and I went back to our normal life. Morning coffee on the porch, evening walks. A routine built on calm, not chaos. He never pushed me to confront them. He never said, "I told you so." He let me feel what I needed to feel. Then the invitation started. My mother called first. Her voice was softer than I remembered. Careful. She said my father was deeply hurt that we'd left early, that people were talking, that misunderstandings had happened. Misunderstandings. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I said, "You didn't misunderstand me. You understood me perfectly. You just didn't value me." Silence. After that came messages from relatives. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted lunch. Old family friends commented on my photos, calling me inspiring. My sister sent a text that simply said, "We should talk." I didn't reply. The real shift came a month later, when my father requested a meeting, not at their house, not at a restaurant he could control. He asked to come to our home. Daniel looked at me and said, "Only if you want to." I did. When my parents arrived, they stood awkwardly in our living room, glancing at the art on the walls. The quiet elegance they'd never imagined was part of my life. My mother kept smoothing her coat. My father looked older than I remembered. He didn't sit right away. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. The words sounded heavy in his mouth, like he wasn't used to carrying them. "For years," he continued, "I measured you by standards that suited my ego, not your happiness." I waited. I'd learned patience. "You embarrassed me that night," he admitted. "Not because of who your husband is, but because you showed me how wrong I'd been." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. "I don't need you to understand my life now," I said calmly. "I needed you to respect it then." They left without asking for forgiveness, and for the first time, that felt enough. Weeks later, something unexpected happened. My sister announced her engagement. Lavish, public, carefully curated. My parents threw themselves into planning, as they always had. But this time, my mother called me. Not to compare, not to criticize. She asked for my advice. I gave it freely, without bitterness. Not because they deserved it, but because I was no longer carrying their weight. At my father's actual retirement, his last day at work, he introduced me to his colleagues as my daughter, who taught me humility. No qualifiers, no comparisons. I smiled politely, but the truth was, the real ending had already happened. It happened the moment I stopped needing their approval to feel whole. Daniel once asked me if I regretted how that dinner unfolded. I told him no. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't proving your worth. It's walking forward so confidently that the people who once doubted you are left staring at your back, realizing too late that you were never behind them at all. Life settled into something steady after that. Not perfect, just honest. My parents didn't transform overnight. They still slipped sometimes. My mother with her careful compliments, my father with his long pauses before saying my name. But the power dynamic had shifted. I no longer waited for warmth. I accepted only what was offered freely. Then came the phone call I never expected. My father had been hospitalized. Nothing dramatic, but serious enough to slow him down. When my mother called, her voice wasn't polished. It was small. Afraid. I went. The room smelled like antiseptic and old paper. My father looked smaller in the hospital bed, the authority he'd carried his whole life reduced to a quiet vulnerability. When he saw me, his eyes filled before he could stop them. "I was so proud of you," he said suddenly. "I just didn't know how to say it without feeling like I was losing control." I didn't correct him. I didn't comfort him either. I just sat there and listened. "I thought if I pushed you hard enough," he continued, "you'd become someone the world respected. I never realized you already were." That was the moment something in me finally loosened. Not forgiveness, understanding. When he was discharged, my parents stopped trying to impress me. They stopped offering advice. They started asking questions. Real ones. And I noticed something else too. People treated me differently now, but not because of Daniel's name. Because I was different. I spoke without apologizing. I declined invitations without explaining. I showed up when I wanted to, not when I felt obligated. At a family gathering months later, an aunt leaned toward me and whispered, "You've changed." I smiled and said, "No." I just stopped shrinking. Daniel watched all of it quietly, the way he always did. One evening as we sat together, he said, "You know, that night wasn't about me revealing who I was." He was right. It was about me finally letting the world see who I had always been. The daughter who didn't beg. The woman who didn't boast. The wife who chose peace over performance. And if my parents learned something along the way, that was their journey, not my burden. Because the real victory wasn't standing taller in their eyes. It was realizing I had been standing tall all along. Time moved forward, as it always does, quietly reshaping things without asking permission. My father recovered fully, but something about him never returned to its old form. He listened more, spoke less. When he laughed, it wasn't the confident sound of a man being admired. It was softer, almost grateful. I noticed he watched me differently now, as if memorizing details he once ignored. My mother tried in her own way. She stopped correcting my choices, stopped offering comparisons disguised as concern. Sometimes she would call just to tell me about her garden or a neighbor's dog. Ordinary things. For the first time, she wasn't performing motherhood. She was practicing it. The hardest change was with my sister. She struggled the most with the shift. Not openly, never directly. But I could feel it in the way her smile lingered too long, the way she'd mention her plans just a bit louder when I was around. For years, she'd been the standard. Now the standard had disappeared. One afternoon, she asked me to meet her alone. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe. No parents, no audience. She stared into her cup for a long time before speaking. "I didn't know they treated you like that," she said finally. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just let the truth exist between us. "They never had to," she continued. "I let them." That was the closest she came to an apology. "I was afraid," she admitted. "If you were enough just being you, then what did that make me?" I reached across the table and took my hand back when she flinched. Some realizations have to be carried alone. "We both survived the same house," I said gently, "just in different ways." After that, things eased. Not perfect, but honest. At my parents' anniversary dinner months later, there were no speeches, no subtle jabs, just food, laughter, and space. My father raised his glass and said simply, "To family. For what we are, not what we pretend to be." His eyes met mine. He didn't look proud. He looked humbled. On the drive home, Daniel asked me if I felt like things had finally come full circle. I thought about it for a moment. "No," I said. "They've just caught up." Because my life hadn't changed the night my husband revealed who he was. It changed the moment I stopped believing I had to prove my worth to people who never learned how to see it. And that kind of ending doesn't fade. It becomes the beginning of everything that comes after. Years later, the story of that retirement dinner became something people whispered about like a legend. Not because of wealth, not because of power, but because it marked the moment everything reversed quietly, without cruelty. My parents aged into gentler versions of themselves. My father stopped giving advice unless asked. My mother learned how to listen without planning her reply. Sometimes they still slipped into old habits, but when they did, they caught themselves. Growth looks like that. Uneven, imperfect, real. One evening, my mother admitted something she'd never said out loud. "I was afraid you didn't need us," she said. I smiled softly. I never stopped needing parents. I just stopped needing permission. That night, when they left, I felt no heaviness in my chest. No resentment waiting to be unpacked later. Just calm. Daniel and I never changed our life to match expectations. We kept it intentionally simple. No public announcements, no grand reveals. Privacy had always been our luxury. Sometimes, at events, someone would recognize him. Their tone would shift instantly. Respect would appear out of nowhere. Daniel always redirected the conversation back to me. "She's the reason," he'd say casually. And every time, I felt the same quiet certainty. The real reveal wasn't his identity. It was mine. I was no longer the daughter trying to earn a seat at the table. I was the woman who chose which tables to sit at. I was the one who walked away without bitterness. The one who stayed without fear. And when I look back at that night, the laughter, the humiliation, the silence that followed, I don't feel anger. I feel gratitude. Because sometimes, the moment meant to break you becomes the one that finally sets you free. And once you're free, nothing anyone says can ever put you back in chains. There was one last moment that brought everything into focus, long after the tension had faded and the story felt finished. My father passed away quietly on a spring morning, years later. No drama, no unfinished business, just time doing what it always does. At the memorial, people spoke about his discipline, his leadership, his legacy. Stories I'd heard all my life. Then my mother asked me to say a few words. I hadn't planned to. But I stood anyway. I didn't talk about his career. I didn't talk about accomplishments. I talked about the man who learned, late but sincerely, that love isn't a standard you measure someone against. It's something you give without conditions. I talked about growth, about humility, about how proud I was of the man he became, not the one he had been. When I finished, the room was silent, not heavy, just still. Afterward, people came up to me quietly, not impressed, not curious, just moved. My mother hugged me longer than usual that day. No words, none were needed. That night, at home, Daniel and I sat together the way we always had. Comfortable silence, familiar peace. "You know," he said softly, "everything that mattered was already decided before that dinner." He was right. The humiliation hadn't been the beginning. The reveal hadn't been the victory. The reconciliation hadn't been the reward. The real story was simpler. I chose myself. I chose peace. I chose a life that didn't require proving anything. And once you make that choice, no stage, no audience, no dramatic reveal ever has power over you again. Because the strongest endings don't arrive with applause. They arrive with quiet certainty and stay forever. After that, there were no more dramatic chapters to tell. Life didn't suddenly become louder or bigger. It became smaller in the best way. Mornings mattered. Conversations slowed. Choices felt intentional instead of reactive. My mother began visiting without announcements or expectations. Sometimes she helped in the kitchen. Sometimes she just sat with me in silence. One afternoon she said, almost to herself, "I spent so many years trying to shape you into someone impressive. I forgot to enjoy who you already were." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth had finally landed where it belonged. My sister and I found an uneasy but real balance. Not closeness. Not distance. Just respect. We stopped competing for air. We stopped measuring who was ahead. We talked like two people who had survived the same storm and no longer needed to prove who got wetter. Daniel never changed. That's what made everything else possible. He remained the same man who held my hand while others laughed, the same man who never rushed my healing or narrated my pain as a victory story. One evening, years later, we attended a quiet dinner. Nothing formal, nothing symbolic. No microphones, no speeches, no audience waiting for a reveal. No one knew who he was. No one questioned who I was. And that felt like the truest ending of all. Because humiliation only has power when you're still asking to be seen. Revenge only matters when you're still keeping score. And validation only controls you when you believe it comes from outside. I didn't need any of that anymore. I had a life that fit. A voice that didn't shake. A worth that stayed constant, whether anyone acknowledged it or not. And that is how the story really ends. Not with shock, not with applause, but with a woman who walked away whole and never looked back. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the version of myself who sat at that retirement dinner, smiling through the sting, wondering if she would ever be enough. I wish I could reach back and tell her this. Nothing dramatic is coming to save you. No perfect moment, no applause, no speech that fixes everything. What comes instead is quieter and stronger. It's the moment you stop rehearsing explanations. The moment you stop hoping someone finally understands. The moment you realize your life doesn't need witnesses to be valid. That realization changes how you walk into rooms. You don't scan faces for approval anymore. You don't brace yourself for judgment. You don't shrink to make others comfortable. You just exist. And strangely, that's when people notice. Not because you demand attention, but because you no longer need it. Years after that dinner, I was asked once if it felt good to win. I thought about it carefully before answering. Winning implies a fight, a scoreboard, a loser. There was no fight. There was only a decision. To stop handing my worth to people who treated it like a bargaining chip. If my parents learned something, good. If they hadn't, I still would have been fine. Because the truth is, the night my husband revealed who he was didn't elevate me. It exposed something else entirely. It exposed how small people become when they confuse control with love. How fragile pride is when it's challenged by quiet dignity. How powerful silence can be when it's backed by self-respect. And it showed me something I never forgot. The most dangerous woman in any room is the one who knows who she is, and no longer needs to explain it. That's the ending they never saw coming, and the life I wake up grateful for every single day.